What if the one person who could save a dying billionaire was a child no one wanted? What if her tiny whisper carried a secret powerful enough to heal a broken body, expose a decades-old betrayal, and resurrect a collapsing empire? This is a story of miracles wrapped in mystery, of greed unmasked, of love reborn in the darkest hour. If you believe in destiny, second chances, and the kind of twist that leaves your heart pounding, subscribe to this channel and step into a story that will change the way you see miracles forever. The machines in the private hospital suite hummed like distant thunder as Adrian Voss, the ruthless and revered CEO of Voss Global Industries, lay dying beneath sheets that cost more than most families earned in a year, his once commanding body now hollowed by an aggressive, incurable illness that doctors had whispered about in cautious tones. Outside the glass walls of his suite, board members circled like vultures. His estranged brother Marcus rehearsed condolences he did not mean, and financial news channels speculated about the inevitable collapse of the billion-dollar empire built by Adrian's iron will. Yet inside that sterile room the air felt heavier than death itself, because Adrian Voss, the man who had conquered markets and crushed competitors without mercy, was terrified, not of dying, but of leaving behind a legacy poisoned by betrayal. For in recent months he had uncovered fragments of evidence suggesting someone within his own family was orchestrating a silent corporate coup, siphoning funds, manipulating stock, and preparing to seize control the moment his heart stopped beating. As the rain lashed against the windows like accusations, Adrian made a decision that stunned his lawyers and enraged his relatives. He demanded to adopt a child immediately, a move so irrational it sent shockwaves through the press. Because why would a dying man with mere weeks to live take responsibility for an orphan? But Adrian had visited St. Catherine's home for children days earlier in secret, wheeled quietly through halls painted in fading pastels, where he had locked eyes with a small girl sitting alone beneath a cracked window, her dark hair tangled, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze steady and unnervingly calm. Her name was Alara, 8 years old, abandoned as an infant with no records, no known relatives, and one peculiar note pinned to her blanket the night she was found. She speaks what is hidden, and when Adrian had asked her why she wasn't playing with the others, she had tilted her head and said in a soft, melodic voice, "They don't like when I tell them what they're thinking," a reply that unsettled him more than any business negotiation ever had. Yet when he reached out to touch her small hand, a strange warmth surged through his veins, sharp and electric, and for the first time in months his chest didn't ache, his breathing steadied, and the world felt less like a fading photograph and more like a promise. So now, in defiance of doctors and shareholders, Adrian Voss signed the adoption papers from his hospital bed, making Alara Voss his legal heir, and the moment the final signature dried, something inexplicable happened. His monitors, which had been erratic and alarming, began to stabilize, his oxygen levels climbed, and the lead physician stared at the screen in disbelief as Adrian's pulse strengthened as though an invisible hand had pressed life back into him. Whispers of a spontaneous remission spread through the hospital like wildfire, but the miracle was only beginning, because when Alara stepped into his hospital room for the first time as his daughter, she approached the bed without fear, placed her palm against his forehead, and whispered, "You're not finished yet," and Adrian felt a surge of clarity so profound it was as if fog had lifted from his mind, revealing not only strength returning to his limbs but memories sharpening with painful precision. Memories of financial anomalies, of Marcus insisting on certain acquisitions, of confidential files disappearing. Within days Adrian's improvement became undeniable, baffling specialists who re-ran tests only to find no trace of the aggressive markers that had ravaged his body, and the media erupted with headlines calling him the man who refused to die. Yet inside the towering Voss penthouse, tension coiled tighter than ever because Marcus's smile had grown brittle, his congratulations forced, his eyes darting toward Alara with poorly concealed hostility, as though he sensed she was more than just a symbolic heir. Alara, meanwhile, explored her new home quietly, her small footsteps echoing through marble corridors, her gaze lingering on portraits of ancestors whose painted eyes seemed almost alive, and she spoke rarely. But when she did, her words sliced through pretense with unsettling accuracy, telling the housekeeper that her son would call that evening after months of silence. He did. Telling the chief financial officer during a formal dinner, "You shouldn't keep secrets in red folders," which caused the man to choke on his wine because hidden in his office safe was indeed a red folder containing falsified reports prepared under Marcus's orders. Adrian began to notice that whenever Alara spoke near someone hiding something, Their composure cracked, as if her gentle voice carried a frequency that disarmed lies, and soon he tested a theory by bringing her into a private board meeting where executives debated a risky merger Marcus aggressively supported, and as numbers flashed across holographic screens and arguments intensified, Alara, seated quietly beside her father, suddenly looked at Marcus and said, "Uncle, why are you moving the money to the island before the storm comes?" And silence detonated across the room, Marcus's face draining of color because only he knew about the offshore accounts established in the Cayman Islands, funds diverted from company reserves under the guise of expansion. Accusations erupted, investigations launched, and within hours forensic accountants uncovered an elaborate scheme years in the making, designed to bankrupt Voss Global at the moment of Adrian's death so Marcus could acquire controlling shares at a fraction of their value. A betrayal so cold it made headlines worldwide. Yet the greatest shock was not the corruption itself but the realization that a child's single sentence had unraveled it. Marcus, desperate and cornered, confronted Adrian privately, accusing him of manipulating the girl, of staging theatrics, but Adrian, strength fully restored and eyes blazing with a father's fury, revealed security footage, financial trails, and recorded conversations that proved Marcus had even bribed a physician months earlier to exaggerate Adrian's diagnosis, hoping despair would hasten decline. And as police escorted Marcus away in handcuffs beneath flashing cameras, Alara watched from an upstairs window, her expression unreadable, whispering, "The storm has passed." Yet mysteries lingered, because Adrian began researching the cryptic note found with Alara as a baby, tracing it to a defunct research facility once funded by Voss Global decades earlier, a facility rumored to have experimented with cognitive enhancement and neurological anomalies in children from vulnerable backgrounds, and horror crept into his veins as he uncovered classified documents suggesting Alara had been part of a study on heightened empathic perception, the ability to detect micro-expressions, hormonal changes, and subtle neurological shifts that reveal truth beneath speech, not supernatural but extraordinarily rare and refined through controversial methods. And when the program was shut down after ethical violations, records were destroyed and children dispersed anonymously, including a baby girl left at St. Catherine's with a warning disguised as prophecy. Guilt consumed Adrian as he realized his own corporation had once funded the shadows that shaped his daughter's early life. Yet when he knelt before Alara and confessed everything, expecting fear or anger, she simply cupped his face and said, "You didn't know then. You know now." A forgiveness so pure it shattered whatever armor remained around his heart. Determined to atone, Adrian redirected vast resources toward ethical research, child welfare reforms, and transparent governance, transforming Voss Global from a titan of profit at any cost into a beacon of accountability. But enemies multiplied as rival corporations sought to exploit past scandals, launching lawsuits and smear campaigns claiming Adrian fabricated his illness and cure for publicity. And during a high-stakes congressional hearing where his credibility hung by a thread, Alara requested to attend, sitting quietly behind him as senators questioned his integrity, until one particularly aggressive prosecutor insinuated the adoption was a calculated stunt, at which point Alara leaned forward and said softly, "You're afraid your own files will be opened," and the man froze, sweat forming along his brow because buried in his encrypted emails were communications with Marcus promising political favors in exchange for regulatory pressure on Voss Global. The hearing adjourned abruptly, investigations pivoted, and once again Alara's presence shifted the balance of power. Yet the deepest twist came on a quiet evening months later when Adrian, reviewing old footage from the orphanage, noticed something impossible. The day he first met Alara, before he had introduced himself, she had looked directly into a security camera and whispered, "He's here," as if expecting him, and when he asked her how she knew he would come, she replied, "I dreamed of you when I was very small. You were sick and alone. I was waiting," and a chill traced his spine because the timing aligned with the earliest onset of his symptoms, long before diagnosis, suggesting a connection beyond logic. Doctors could not explain his remission, calling it a medical anomaly. Yet Adrian felt in his bones that the moment he chose love over legacy, life over control, something fundamental shifted within him. Perhaps stress and isolation had fed his illness as much as biology, and perhaps the warmth he felt when he first held Alara was not magic but the human heart remembering how to beat for someone else. Years passed and Voss Global flourished under transparent leadership, its stock soaring not from ruthless takeovers but sustainable innovation, and Adrian often credited his daughter publicly, though he guarded the more mysterious aspects of her gift fiercely. ensuring she lived not as a spectacle but as a child. Attending school, painting, laughing. Yet occasionally, when crisis loomed, she would tilt her head with that same quiet intensity and speak a sentence that cut straight to the hidden fracture threatening to split everything apart. On the anniversary of his adoption of Alara, Adrian hosted a gala celebrating the company's rebirth, standing before thousands as he recounted the night he believed he would die, his voice thick with emotion as he described the small hand that steadied his pulse and the tiny voice that dismantled empires of deceit, declaring that true power was not domination but truth spoken without fear. And as applause thundered, he glanced at Alara in the front row, her eyes luminous, and realized the greatest miracle was not merely his restored health or saved corporation but the family forged from abandonment and choice. Later that night, as fireworks bloomed over the city skyline, Alara slipped her hand into his and whispered, "You were never meant to end in that hospital room." And Adrian understood that destiny is not a straight line but a series of doors we dare to open, and sometimes the key comes disguised as a child the world overlooked. The mystery of her intuition remained unsolved, suspended between science and something softer, something sacred, but Adrian no longer needed a clinical explanation, because every morning he woke beside the sunrise, breath steady, heart strong, aware that he had been granted a second life not by chance but by connection, and every time Alara laughed, bright, unburdened, utterly alive, he felt the echo of that first miraculous surge through his veins, a reminder that the smallest voice can shatter the loudest lies, that love can resurrect what ambition nearly destroys, and that sometimes salvation arrives not with thunder, but with a whisper from a lucky charm mouth that speaks what is hidden and heals what is broken.